The Yuri undertones are super strong in this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal. The Death Busters arc continues in the third season of Sailor Moon Crystal, and this week's episode was, dare I say it, badass? That's right, this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal was pretty freaking awesome. It all concluded with this big action scene where we got to see Sailor Mars and Sailor Jupiter teaming up against the evil witch, Eudial. But most importantly of all, I think the best thing about this episode is just seeing the Sailor Senshi or the Sailor Guardians just hanging out with each other and having just plain fun, pleasant personalities. Something that was completely absent from the first two seasons of the show. Basically, it almost seems like in the first two seasons of Sailor Moon Crystal that Usagi and all of her friends were straight up caricatures of the characters from the original manga and anime series from the 90s. They weren't very fun to watch. In this series, I absolutely love these characters. I especially love all of the new villains who are being introduced in this series as well. Not to mention, we're going to have some brand new Sailor Senshi who are up to their own secret mission, which I believe they're actually trying to take down the Mugen Academy from the inside. I'm talking, of course, about Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus, who, again, in this episode, were also pretty awesome. And it seems like they've gone through this whole divide and conquer kind of strategy, with Neptune going after Tuxedo Mask, and then you have Uranus going after Sailor Moon. In fact, the way this week's episode ends is going to leave a lot of people with their jaws on the floor, because for some reason out of nowhere, Sailor Uranus just decides to plant a big ol' kiss right on Sailor Moon. And we're not talking on the cheek here, they go lips to lips. And that's just one of the many Yuri undertones from this episode. There's also the character of Hotaru Tomoe, who is this girl who apparently has some super secret healing abilities, and she's actually going to become good friends with Sailor Chibiusa. Maybe they'll become more than just friends, because Sailor Chibiusa seems to be completely obsessed with Hotaru, always commenting that Hotaru is so beautiful. But Yuri undertones aside, this was another great episode. I think my favorite thing about it is how they're finally starting to expand on the villains of the series. So we have Mugen Academy, which apparently has this group inside of it which is known as the Witches 5, who work for this mysterious villain known as Pharaoh 90. They're also working directly under this evil scientist who goes by the name of Professor Soichi Tomoe. This guy is pretty classic right here. He's a villain that I do remember seeing in the original Toonami days, and I like how, unlike the original version, they get right to showing him, because I remember they didn't want to show him a lot in the original series. They kept him in shadow. You only saw the glare from his glasses, and while that was a great build-up, it's really great to finally see him in this episode, and you can tell that this guy is just a guy who is lost to his mad science. His wife is dead, he only has his daughter left, and he has this like weird eyeglass which has this like weird design on it. I have no idea what it is, but apparently it's some sort of weird magical power which has been bestowed to him thanks to the witch Cowlinite, who's also getting ready to send out her troops, the Witches 5, to go take care of the Sailor Senshi. And in this week's episode, we get to see the fiery witch who goes by the name of Eudial, and she is just so damn cool. Way more charismatic than just about any villain from the first season of the show. And like I said, the action scene at the end of this week's episode was surprisingly awesome. What I think I really liked about the scene, aside from the fact that the animation was a lot more competent than the first two seasons of the show, is that they focused exclusively, mostly on Mars and Jupiter as they teamed up against Eudial. And since they both have powers which revolve around fire and lightning, it's going to be a real difficult battle for them, because Eudial actually has the power to control fire and make it use like a big flamethrower. It's pretty freaking awesome. But even Sailor Mars does this great attack in this episode, which is this big fire snake, which she basically fires right at Eudial, which bites down on top of her, sends her flying into the earth with a big, massive explosion, but she just ends up sending the attack right back at both of them, and that's when Sailor Mercury decides to come in and put out the fire with her water abilities. It looks like all the different members of the Witches 5 are going to have a certain element attached to them, so it's really going to be a game of rock, paper, scissors upon which member of the Sailor Guardians is going to be able to take them down. Throughout the course of the the episode, however, there is still this other weird subplot going on, where there's a couple of characters who are sharing the same dream. There's Tuxedo Mask, there's Eudial, there's Hotaru, and each of them keep having these weird visions of all this ominous stuff which is going to be happening in the future. Not to mention you have the witch Cowlinite, who is also using this weird waiting pool that she's trying to get some information out of. It's all super cryptic at the moment. In fact, this is the third episode of this season, and we're just now getting the names of the villains. They call themselves the Death Busters, and that is a pretty cool name, especially for Sailor Moon. I just love the sound of that. The Death Busters. But there's also some other cool things about this episode. Like I said, they really do take some time to give these characters some great personalities. When they're just hanging out with each other, you have Sailor Mars, who's going to train in the mountains by herself. When all of her friends go to join her, it's just a real nice, pleasant scene, especially when they end up having this big sleepover, which eventually turns into this massive battle in the countryside with explosions in the mountains. It's pretty ridiculous. My only real problem with this episode, and this is something that's just been the case for just about every Sailor Moon episode, it seems like every single villain in the series has like the same exact plan, where they go to Earth, they try to brainwash a bunch of kids or people, the Sailor Senshi show up, and they beat them. That's pretty much exactly what goes on in this episode. But still, the animation and the action is what really makes this one special. So, what's the rundown on this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal? Sailor Uranus kissing Sailor Moon at the end of this week's episode was pretty damn shocking and incredibly random, to say the least. I have no idea why Neptune and Uranus don't want to work with the other Sailor Guardians. Maybe it's because they don't want them to ruin their secret plan as they infiltrate the Mugen Academy. I'm not even really sure why Uranus decided to kiss Sailor Moon. It just made absolutely no sense, but it made for one hell of a cliffhanger ending. I can't wait to see how it's going to pick up in next week's episode, and I have a feeling that Neptune's probably not going to be too happy about that kiss. Yuri undertones again aside, this was another fantastic episode of the series, which keeps managing to just completely trump the first two seasons of the show, which at this point are completely piss poor when compared to this. That final action scene, guys, was so much more competently done than any action scene from the first season. I especially loved the look of Mars's attack as she was powering it up for the first time. They used this sort of weird, sketchy art style when the fire erupted right in front of her, and it looked really impressive. Not only that, but we didn't waste half of the episode going through a lot of transformation sequences. We only get them from Mars and Jupiter in this episode, and when Mercury and the others show up, they're already in their transformative states. And again, the episode does end with one of the witches being defeated in one single attack from Sailor Moon, the Heart Spiraling Attack. That being said, I still love it, it's super classic, and if you put yourself in the right state of mind, this is a series that is really fun to watch, especially the second season. The characters are 10 times more fun than they've ever been, and it's being done with a lot better production value, and some really cool villains who have some really dark motives. I can't wait to learn a little bit more about Professor Tomoe. He seems like he's going to be one of the more interesting villains from this arc, what his true motives are, why he's holding on to his daughter and using her special powers, the mysteriousness of how his wife was killed or how she was taken away from him. I can't wait to learn about all of that. He's a much more tragic villain than the ones that we've seen from the previous seasons, which were essentially just big giant gas monsters from space. This is an actual human with real feelings and lots of emotion, so I can't wait to see what this guy is going to be all about, as well as getting to see how Hotaru's story is going to evolve, because I do know as the series is going to go on, spoiler alert, she is eventually going to become Sailor Saturn, but how that goes down is still a complete mystery, at least to me anyway, because I don't read the manga, and I barely remember anything from watching this show on the Toonami days, which is why watching this show right now is just so refreshing. It's a time capsule of a classic 90s series, and if you even consider yourself a casual fan of Sailor Moon, check out this show. You might see something you like. So I'm going to give this week's episode right here, believe it or not, another 4 out of 5. Just a fun, great episode right here that's bringing a lot of nostalgia to me and reminding me why Sailor Moon is such a classic series in the first place. It's not because of its over-the-top action, it's because of its enduring characters. So, great episode. Make sure to check it out, Sailor Moon fans. But if any of you guys did watch this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. You guys are awesome. Thank you for watching this review. If you would like to, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and please do subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be able to see all of our latest anime and manga reviews. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby.